I just want to let the participants know who are joining the meeting via Zoom. If you're presenting, please do not turn on your cameras until you're ready to speak. So if you could just please take your video cameras off until you are ready to present your portion of the presentation. Thank you. And we're ready whenever you are, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We are ready to go. We will now call this meeting of the Cuyahoga County Districting Commission to order. And will the clerk please take the roll?
Good afternoon, everyone. It is now 3:05 p.m. Calling the roll for the Thursday, August 19th, Cuyahoga County Districting Commission meeting. Mr. Frost?
Here.
Mr. Kazel?
Present.
Mr. Lumpkin? Ms. Morgan?
Here.
Ms. Murphy?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. And according to our agenda, we're going to go right into public comment. Part of the reason we will be considering approval of our minutes from the last meeting at our next meeting. Just time constraints, those minutes are not prepared yet. So we're going to go straight into public comment. Before I do, I know we have a couple of elected officials with us. Ray A. Freeman of the Warrensville Heights Board of Education with us, education member. Good to see you. And County Councilman Marty Sweeney is with us as well. And that's a nice segue because I think we have one public commenter. Is that correct, Andrea?
Yes, we do. Councilman Marty Sweeney.
There we are. Councilman, please come on up to the podium and welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and distinguished board members. I am County Councilman Martin J. Sweeney, and I just came down to say thank you. You guys you ladies and gentlemen have an important decision and process to go through, and I am here to offer any assistance. And the one thing I just want to share with you, because I have some familiarity with this process, is things on a map and lines sometimes aren't as evident or understandable without talking to some folks. So some nuances in the city of Cleveland in particular, because that has some geographical areas that are not kept whole. If you want to ask me any questions or any other colleagues, I think that might add some value. And one tiny little example, there's a street called 130th, and they have surrounded by railroad tracks, but it looks like a nice little neighborhood, but that's an area where they're all by themselves, and to split it there would be something that you wouldn't know by looking at a map. And that's just something I'm familiar with from way back when. So how's that? Any questions for me? Just kidding. You guys enjoy the time, and if I can help, and I have all the confidence in our strategies because I've known Jeff for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you. And to the clerk, is there any other public comment?
No, Mr. Chair, no other public comment has been submitted.
Great, thank you. We, on our agenda then, we'll go right into item 4, which is a presentation from our strategy group on the following topics, which will start with responses to questions from August 17th. And I believe, are you going to go first, Mike? Okay, so we'll have Mike Thomas with our strategy groups.
As I said, Mike Thomas, I'm pinch hitting for Jeff Rusnak, who is joining us remotely. I will be joined today in the presentation with, in our section, by Destiny Hinton, who is with our strategy group, Michael Muller, who is with Muller Public Strategies, and Matt Cassidy from Target Smart. As an overview of what we're going to cover today in our presentation, we're going to first address responses to questions that were raised at the previous meeting on Tuesday. We want to update you on the website and where it stands, the work we've done on the regional meetings that we discussed at the last meeting, the availability of data for the public and members of the commission, the current map with population, showing population deviation, and some decision points that we need to present to the commission in order to move forward with the work. First up in our presentation of that information is responses from the questions that were posed on August 17th, and Michael Muller from Muller Public Strategies will be handling that. Michael is remote.
Mr. Muller?
here. I'm just trying to start the video. If that's something that
Mr. Mueller, your volume is way down, and we're going to try to fix it on this end and yours, but I'm going to ask you to start over once we get your volume okay.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Still pretty light. Try again now.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Great, terrific, yep.
Great, okay. And I'm unable to start my video, otherwise I would. Would you prefer me not on video? Is it totally up to the host?
If you're able to start your video, go ahead. If you can't, we're fine just listening to you.
Okay, great. Then I'll start, running through. So at the last commission meeting, I actually could start my video now.
There you go.
Thank you. So at the last commission meeting, I took copious notes of questions from the public. So I wanted to start off by walking through some of the questions that were raised. And of course, as new questions come up, we're going to be very responsive to each of the needs from the commissioner or the public. So one of the questions raised was, could we consider other community factors that range from healthcare issues, LGBTQ communities, moving beyond the population data and ethnic and racial components that we often look at first and foremost from the census data? And the answer to that is yes. I mean, when we look at those factors, and I think the councilman brought this up on the front end of our discussion today about looking into different nuances and factors in the community. This is really part of that discussion that we need to have about communities of interest. Now, I will say that as part of that, when we look, some of this may be much more narrative based, where the commission then hears public input, and that becomes a discussion point because there isn't always data that tracks to give us the final determination of what is best in a scenario like that. But that is one of the key areas that why today and as we move forward in the meetings ahead, really important for us to be able to get the color and context so that we can do this in the right way possible. And moving next, the next question that was raised was, could public input be more of an interactive exchange? And however the commissioners choose for us to handle that, I mean, we are glad and responsive here in these meetings to wind up having whatever engagement everyone thinks is appropriate and makes sense based on the form that we have. So we're prepared to answer questions on the spot as much as possible, and they don't always have to wait till the next meeting. And also raised was, is there a way to address the undercounted communities and specifically some of the homeless concentrations that come up as we look at this? And I think this also kind of falls a little bit into this community of interest element when we talk about certain at-risk populations that we can look at. But where we are tied to is the census data. We are looking off. We really aren't in a position where we can take an undercounted area and be able to do anything other than recognize it because we won't have the data track. But I think this is important if we're looking at it specifically for a governmental community-based need. That is a perfect and legitimate way that you can formulate a community of interest. So it is something that we can definitely look at in the process, but some of this becomes very subjective. And so that will be a determination for the commissioners as we get that feedback. And it was also raised in the last meeting that how we would utilize, or if we were going to utilize data from Ohio University. And I've been following some of the news on that project, and any data that comes to the commission that we are in a position to review and analyze, we're prepared to take into consideration. Obviously, the foundation of our building is the census data that we're working with. But I will say the one caveat, with data, which has to be within the legal constraints that we have, in terms of how we are looking at data and not bringing partisan data into it would be obviously the one thing that I would just want to stay on the front because we have to work within the legal bounds of the data tracks that we're able to use in this process. And then one of the other questions, which is a tougher one to answer, but I'm going to give you the best and most honest, frank answer I can on this, is what is the standard for packing or diluting in a minority community? And this is always a tough one because there's a lot of scholarly articles that would put points that would sit there and say this is the X percentage. I think it gets into kind of a larger, conversation that's, I think important to have on the front end. That the criteria that we have to work with, and for example, when you have a lower deviation level, you sometimes, from a map drawer's challenge, you can be boxed in when you're unable to split, certain units of government, and then you have a low deviation. You then have to accept the units of government and political subdivisions as they are drawn, so that you are in a position that you're achieving the deviation set forth. So if we wound up with a lower deviation, that could be a restriction. And as you go through that drawing process, you can wind up in a scenario where the percentages drawn here in our county may look a lot different than if you thought about what packing or diluting looked in somewhere else across the country, going through a similar process, but with different criteria that they had to work within. And the real challenge here is that you want to create cohesive communities that allow opportunity for underrepresented communities to have representation. So that it's really a balancing act. And so I hate to put like a hard number, on it, because it even varies amongst the academics. I mean, some people would start as low as the low 60s on percentage of a population and consider once you cross that, you'll be packing, and some would argue that it's in the 70s. So there's a lot of different takes on it, but this is where I think the input from the community and understanding how we can best draw the most majority minority community across the entire county is how you really try to approach it, so that you're in lines with creating as many opportunities as possible for historically underrepresented minority communities. So with that being said, it's a bit of a non-answer, but I think this is going to be one that, as we work through the process on the issues of packing and dilution, that's one of the challenges that we're going to have to face, and to strike a balancing act to do it in the right way here. And some of the criteria that will be determined through the commissioners as we go through this process, will help us get to a place where we may realize that a wider deviation, may actually give us the ability to be a little bit, more creative. If we're lower on deviation, we're probably going to be in a bit more of a restrictive scenario. So these are some of the questions that we need to go through, so we can get that right. And then there was a kind of a more broad question asked. I guess it's more of an opinion, at this point, of whether or not, is our belief that the current map, is compact. And so there's scores that we're going to be able to run on the old map versus new iterations that we're drawing for consideration. The score's compactness. And this goes back to kind of a point that I just raised earlier about the units of government and how we actually go about making sure that we're following within the lines. And actually it leans itself into a question, and I kind of saved it for this one, because we were asked about the hierarchy. And the hierarchy that we need to follow by law is that it's townships, then municipalities, and city wards, and then voting precincts. And so as we go through the hierarchy and we start thinking about that, each of those units of government that we are preserving and keeping whole, as we keep them whole, the shape of them will impact our compactness. And this is actually one of like the age-old challenges on map drawing, is that from the eyeball test, looking at the current map, you could sit there and say that there's a lot of areas that you would score pretty high on compactness, just from a subjective test of looking at it. But there are some areas in the county, especially when you get further away from the city of Cleveland, that you start to run into areas to properly balance population. You wind up having to take some municipalities that are drawn that maybe have larger geography than some others, and these are going to be some of the choices we go through it, but we will run a compactness scoring process as we go through it. We've not done one on the old map at this point, but we definitely can and will do that in advance of next week, which I know everyone will be looking forward to, because on Monday will be the first day that we'll be rolling out the initial iterations. And I'm looking forward to, a lot of, feedback today. I thought some of the feedback up top was actually really important. I actually was able to take some notes off of that, because we really, as we go into this endeavor, and it's going to be, a lot of work over the next few days, drawing those original iterations for commissioners. The more information that we have to work through this will really add a lot beyond the data for us to do this in a way that is right. And I will, preface it by saying that the first draws, we're going to try to be as perfect and on point as possible, but I'm expecting we're going to be drawing many iterations during this very compressed time period, because often the old saying, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." When it comes to districting, perfect matters, and so we are striving to be as perfect under the direction of the commissioners, and really being responsive to the public feedback. So that was my responses to the questions, but obviously I'll be available throughout this today as we deal with new questions that come up through today's public forum.
Mr. Miller, I was looking at the data and the maps, and I noticed that in the 2010 map, the districts that were below the average are the same districts that are below the average now. And I was wondering, I know nobody knows the future, but I wonder if like population trends should be considered. In other words, like we know that the city of Cleveland and many of the inner ring suburbs are losing population. Even the data that we have today is 8 or 9 months old already. Probably it's not perfectly accurate. So, should we take into consideration, do you think, projected or assumed populations over the next 10 years, so that each district, although it may be losing population, they'll try to make an effort to put those people above the average within a 5% deviation, or is that not a good idea?
Yeah, that's a really it's a very, very interesting point, and I know that having gone through other processes last decade, we definitely did try to not forecast on the growth of some areas, but we did think about growths of certain populations on a community of interest standpoint. But it's something that we can definitely look at, because ultimately, when we think about the deviation, the idea of setting a deviation that we are comfortable staying within, but if we're looking at an area that we want to know that 5 years from now that we are have done our best to try to address and put it at a marker that we think is reasonable, so that we don't wind up with a community that winds up becoming out of balance badly in just a few years. That's a really interesting consideration. It's something that we'll definitely talk amongst ourselves with the team and work through this process to see our best path forward on that. But yeah, it's a question someone hasn't asked me before, so I find that interesting and something very worthwhile for consideration.
I think we'll move on, if that's all right, Mr. Chairman. If we could bring the presentation back up. Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
That would be helpful. What we'd like to do next is talk with you about the Districting Commission website. As we discussed, as Jeff discussed at the Tuesday meeting, it was our plan to have that live today, and it is up and live. It is available through the county site, and there is a link on the correct page. If we could advance to, I think it's slide 6. Oh, use the mouse. I'm supposed to be doing it. My bad. Well, that's much easier, isn't it? Okay, thank you. The site is live. You have a screenshot of it there, and the link is at the bottom of the screen right now. It's available through the county site. There are links to it throughout the county site, and we will be pushing the website link out broadly. We're going to be announcing it in the part of our press release for today, and making sure that we're getting it out as broadly as possible. Our goal is to use the site as both a repository of everything the commission is doing, so in pursuing the open and transparent part of our charge, and also as a hub for providing, for people to provide input and perspective on the process. The way we have it organized is that we've posed up front a series of questions that we anticipate people being interested in asking, and using those questions as links to where that information may be found to get people to what they're looking for as quickly as possible. And then we also have, there we go, there also is on the site a way for people to add comments, contact us, and to submit anything they would like as a form of input. We will be collating that information and making sure that anything that's sent to us through the site is presented to the commission for consideration. So this site will continue to evolve as our work evolves. Everything that we do will be posted there. Everything that's done publicly will be posted there. And we hope to use it as both, as I said, the place where everything about this process can be found, and one of the main ways that people can provide input. Are there any questions about the website? Or if you get a chance tonight after the meeting to go through it, appreciate it. Any feedback you want to provide us, we will be happy to take and incorporate. Next up in our presentation is a discussion of the regional meetings that we discussed at the previous meeting, and Destiny Hinton from our strategy group will be taking us through that part of the presentation.
Hi. Hi again. Thank you all for having me. I'm just going to let you all know that we have done a lot of work over the past 48 hours. We reached out to a lot of places around the county, including libraries, churches, and some schools even. And what we found after doing that due diligence was that a lot of places would love to have us. However, their COVID restrictions aren't allowing us to be in the facility, and some actually said, yes, we can have that meeting, and after further consideration with their teams, decided that it wouldn't be the best thing as far as COVID. Moving forward, we also had to take a look at the AV needs to make sure that we were able to live stream and make sure that folks were able to access the meeting as usual with the county meetings. And with those needs, we recommend that we keep the meetings here at the times that we've recommended, and from there, offer a webinar style meeting. So that means that folks would be able to offer live comments through our tech here. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Pardon me, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, if you could speak a little bit, yeah.
Microphone on.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was saying thank you, and let's pause for a moment to consider this. This is a change from where we left the matter on Tuesday. And so you did let me know just before the meeting, but this is news to the commission. Do others have questions about this change, that rather than doing regional meetings both on a COVID restriction and technology grounds, the recommendation is now that we hold each of our meetings here at Cuyahoga County headquarters. Any comment or discussion on that?
Well, I would like to say that we were hoping that we could get out in the region, but we do have a time constraint.
Excuse me, Ms. Murphy, if you could make sure your microphone is on.
With
you.
the COVID restrictions and with our time constraints, you know, I'm sorry to hear that we won't be able to do that. It was our aspiration to do it. But I still like the idea then of having that meeting on Wednesday in the evening, because it may give us an opportunity to see some members of the public that can't come during the workday. Thank you.
And I agree with that. I have to say I'm a little disappointed because I think that the perception, the public perception will be that we didn't try particularly hard on this, even though, given we've only been working on this for 48 hours, and I'm sure that it was a Herculean effort on your part. I know just from my own experiences on campus what it's like trying to get people into spaces that may not be necessarily accommodating at the moment. But I would hope again that not only are we able to see people in the evening on next Wednesday, but that we place our meetings online and that we have ample opportunity for people to share their views and respond to the work that we're doing, because it's important, and I think that people are interested in what we're doing, and it certainly has a dramatic and direct effect on the next decade for all of us. So, I'm really going to encourage us to do as much outreach as we possibly can to ensure that the community is fully invested in this process. Thanks.
I agree with Sandra. As much as we have to do our best to make this as accessible as possible to the public.
Mr. Chairman, I think that the meeting Wednesday will probably give us some idea as to whether or not we should move forward with even beginning to establish another regional meeting. If we have enough interest down here, enough people to come down here, and then that probably will give us some idea as to what the next steps would be in terms of establishing a regional location for a meeting. So I think that meeting Wednesday is a good idea.
Thank you. And a couple of other considerations. I too am disappointed. I know Sultan, our strategies and their team are disappointed as well, and put the work in to not only make that recommendation, but then work on following through. But given where we are, given both the time and logistical constraints, a couple of points I want to make for the public, and I hope that in the publicizing of these meetings, we also emphasize, first and foremost, that parking is free here, that any member of the public who comes to one of our meetings here will be able to get a parking voucher when they arrive, so that they don't have to come out of pocket for coming down to this public meeting. And I do think that's very important. And also downtown is quite accessible to public transportation, whereas if we get out of downtown, it might be hit or miss for the ability of people to get there by public transportation. So those are 2 points for the good. The other is using technology, which many of us are now more comfortable with than we were before COVID, that we can, number one, what we're doing already, which is people being able to view these meetings remotely. And I do think an item of discussion that I understand the team may be working on, and Ms. Hinton, you may be able to comment on, would be to also set up the technology where it could be run more as a webinar, and that people who have public comment could make that comment remotely as well. Do you have any thoughts on that at this point?
Yes, that would be our recommendation moving forward in order to still allow for public comment in real time.
Thank you. I'm just curious, what are the considerations for this space, this building, and this space that we're in? So if we have a standing room only crowd on Wednesday, is that something that is allowed by Cuyahoga County, or are there restrictions here as well?
Ms. Hinton, I want to turn to Joe Nani on that issue.
I can provide a little bit of background. As you can see, we do have the chairs separated, and traditionally we have more seats in here prior to COVID. We do have the capacity to put a television out in the lobby out there also that would have sound and video, and we can add chairs. Additionally, there's a couple meeting rooms over here. So in the past, when we've had larger than capacity crowds, we've been able to spread folks out. I don't anticipate that we'll run out of space here.
Yeah, I don't think so
But
either.
we have backup
It's
plans.
something to consider. Thank
Yep,
you.
thank you.
Ms. Hinton, please continue. We've interrupted your presentation, but
Oh,
thank
no
you for
worries,
that.
no worries.
right at
Thank
the
you
outset.
all for your input. Yes, so one of the things we all were just hitting on is how are we going to do our outreach to the public? And we have a couple people on the team that'll be working solely on outreach to the public. So starting out, I'll let you know that I think our greatest asset here, and one of our greatest assets in the county, is the amazing network of community partners, churches, and I would say elected officials that are constantly publicizing and doing the work of getting the word out. So what we're going to do is be tapping on all those community partners through the, we're creating a bunch of templates to send out as far as emailing to all of those folks. We have direct calls going to be made to those folks, as well as be submitting the meetings to calendars and weekly newsletters as well. So we're just going to tap into the networks that already exist within the county and push it out that way, and then make a bunch of direct calls to make sure that folks are hearing from us and knowing what is going on next week. So we have a lot of time dedicated to those direct calls because, of course, hearing someone talk about it will then make our community leaders echo what's going on here.
Thank you. Are there questions on any of that or comments? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
A quick question. So does that include, I note that you have a broad-based network here. Will that include the general media or social media?
Yes, so we're actually, we have our flyer there, but it'll be adjusted for social media. And then, like I said, when we're sending out, we'll provide I would say a generic post, but I'm hoping that folks will tailor it to their audience by letting them know the importance that they feel in particular to the different communities that those different social services and clergy serve.
Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Henton. And back to you, Mr. Thomas, I think.
Ms. Morgan, I should also address the issue of the general media and news media. We sent out our first press release following the meeting on Tuesday, and we've been developing strategies to try to engage the media in what is a difficult topic for them to cover generally. This is a complicated process, as you know better than anyone, and it is often difficult for them to write about. The way we've been thinking about it is, and trying to present it, is that the challenge of this timeline is not something that we created here locally. It happened as a result of decisions made elsewhere, but we have to rise to the occasion to make sure that we are being as open, transparent, and accountable as possible. And our hope is to appeal to the media that they should join us in partnership with that. This isn't something that's partisan. It's something that is important for the functioning of our community going forward. And it's our hope that we will be getting a positive response from members of the media, and that will translate into them helping us reach their audiences with publicizing the opportunity for people to provide input and perspective. Next up, Matt Cassidy from Target Smart is going to be presenting information about data availability.
Thank you. Mr. Cassidy.
Thank you. My name is Matt Cassidy. I'm with Target Smart. I'm handling some of the more technical aspects and some of the actual drawing of the map. So first off, as Mike said, I'm going to speak about data availability. And this also goes along with the details that he gave, that Mr. Thomas has given regarding the website, and is also an answer to a couple of inquiries that we had at Tuesday's meeting. I believe it was a gentleman from the League of Women Voters had asked about availability of data, and because they were looking to construct their own map, and that's certainly something that we encourage the public to do if they would like to take the time and submit a map for suggestion. So what the plan is to make the census data, and this is again the data that was released a week ago today. We'll make that available on the website. I believe the plan is to have the current precincts, which are called DTDs, and with the census, then with the designation of the current council districts, And then also it accounts for some of a few precincts that were designated as split. So some of that's been rectified, and then it'll have the basic population data from the census. So I think that the idea is to sort of replicate what I'll be putting to use as I go through the map drawing process. And then I'm going to move on. I'll be talking about the sort of current map with population deviation. And I just wanted to sort of take you through, give you kind of an overview of my approach to it, my approach to just sort of map drawing in general in redistricting. So first thing is in Tuesday's presentation, we talked about just districting criteria in general. So wanted to point out a couple more specific things. For one, there's the statutory requirements that are guiding this. First is contiguity. And contiguity basically just means that all districts are in one part. There's not going to be part of a district on one side of the county and part in the far other corner and call that one district. We cannot have that. So they're all going to be one part. Districts should neither pack nor dilute African American or Hispanic residents. This is, you know, a federal statute, so we will be abiding by that. Then thirdly, districts must not split precincts. And then after that, it follows the more aspirational criteria, and these are ones where there's, you know, a little more leeway as to how they're applied during this process. So number one, districts must have substantially equal populations with a range of allowable deviation from the ideal district size. Number two, whether the number of residents being assigned to new districts should be minimized. And so that's basically whether the constituency of the council member changes greatly or not. And I think there was in 2011, I think there's no more than 10% maximum change. So it just gives continuity of representation. Division of communities other than the city of Cleveland due to the size of its population. Obviously, Cleveland is over the ideal district size, so there's going to be multiple Cleveland districts. Whether or not you want to split any, or it's going to be allowed to split any other towns outside of Cleveland, that's one criteria that could be applied. And then fourth, allowing council members to continue to represent their current district. So that's, again, also kind of goes along with the second point. It all sort of falls under, you know, continuity representation or just, you know, minimizing the overall disruption. And then onto the next slide. This shows an illustration of a couple concepts that we had spoken about. So anytime when I'm first, you know, setting to redraw boundaries, you know, aside from reading the constitutional or statutes that guide it, number two is to start to look at where the population changes have occurred that we need to account for, because that's why redistricting happens. Essentially, it's just to account for any population changes that have occurred in the previous decade, and to try to get closer to that, you know, one person, one vote that's, you know, important in a representative democracy. So this is the taking the 2020 total population and applying it to the current district boundaries. And then just for reference, a couple of terms that I've been using. Ideal population is a sort of simple math equation. You take the total population for the county and you divide it by 11 to get that number that you aspire to get closest to equal population. So that's the ideal population of each district. And then the deviation from that is how far above or below that ideal these districts are. And then in looking at that, that gives you an idea of how much things will have to change, because in trying to balance out one population and another, there can be a waterfall effect. And so it gives you a sort of preliminary idea as to the amount of changes that will need to occur. So you see in this is again an illustration of one of the points that one of the council members had made, that these districts, in Cleveland and the inner ring suburbs, they're further below the deviation. So the sort of pinkish districts are 0 to 5% below. Districts 8 and 10 are between 5 and 10% below the ideal population. And then along the outside, District 6 and 1 on the opposite end are that much above. So those that are above the have a positive deviation will generally have to shrink in area. They'll become geographically smaller, whereas the ones like 8 and 10 will have to gain more population, may have to add precincts, add towns to get closer to that ideal. It's just that when, possibly there can be, not looking at the underlying boundaries, but possibly there can be some trades here where 10 becomes closer from taking from this overage in 11, the slight overage, and that can help balance them. And 8, could move, end up moving to the south into District 6 to take, and which would in turn bring 6 closer to 0 by taking that overage from it. So that's just to sort of walk you through just kind of a, preliminary academic exercise. And then on the next slide, next 2 slides, sort of a look at the population. As was noted, one of the statutory requirements is neither packing nor diluting African American and Hispanic residents, and this was also touched on by Michael Mueller near the closer to the beginning of the presentation today. So I mean, sometimes you look at the numbers and you think, oh, these are packed, or if you look at the African American percentage of a district or the Hispanic percentage of a district, you can think that possibly they are all packed into one another, and thus trying to remove them from other districts, which happens in cases of gerrymandering, essentially, where they're not getting represented by the people they should be. So they, but then other times where they just live in geographically compact areas, and they're, and you'll see just more effects of kind of natural sorting amongst the population. So what this shows here is these numbers are on the voting precinct level with the council districts and municipal boundaries overlaid. And I think that what is shown here still basically aligns with the districts that were drawn 10 years ago, where the highest African American percentages are in District 7, 8, 9, and 10. And I'm not sure if this is a change here in 11, if that's growing, but that's something that we will look at. But it doesn't, it's not showing an indication of the African American population, sort of mobilizing, spreading out across other parts of the county. And then next slide. And similarly here as well, where you have District 3 that has the highest percentage of the Hispanic population. I think it's about just under 28% of District 3. But at the same time, you can see where that is concentrated in a fairly core area. District 3 itself would be at least past that, superficial idea of compactness that also Michael had touched upon. It's not particularly stretched out geographically or anything, and it, I think would pass a lot of tests there. Now, whether there can be a case made for possibly connecting that with population in the southwest corner of District 2, something we might explore. If that may, if there's possibility that may give a greater chance for Hispanic representation, then we'd look at that, but without, disrupting, the districts, and also, trying to meet those other aspirational goals that we'll have to account for during the process. So that was what I was going to present today, and I'm welcome to take any further questions or address anyone who would like any further details on those matters. But that's sort of where I'm at as I work through this and begin to adjust the lines and the boundaries. Next, I believe we'll be discussing further decision points for the commission.
Let's just pause for a second if we could.
Thank you, Mr. Cassidy. And any commissioners have any questions for Mr. Cassidy?
I have a question.
Ms. Morgan, yes.
Thank you. Are there other either racial or ethnic communities that we will be taking into consideration? As an example, Asian communities or others?
Yes, I mean, the basic data set that was provided by the census that is put to use for redistricting, it covers both Hispanic and non-Hispanic, and then non-Hispanic, white, non-Hispanic, African-American, American Indian, Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and then other race, and then combinations of two or more races. And then there's even more finite detail offered for that. But so yeah, right now, there's no district. I think the highest district for Asian population, it appears to be 7% in, I believe, District 6. So yeah, we will certainly be looking for, if there are opportunities that just do not automatically present themselves, but to possibly increase the voting strength of any of the other groups. So yeah, certainly will be accounted for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Cassidy? Yes, Mr. Lumpkin.
What is the timeline of you drawing up these maps? I mean, what is your estimated timeline? So what do you propose to be by the end of the week on this?
I mean, I just will abide by the timelines given to me, certainly, and adjust my schedule accordingly. I will be drawing in earnest, beginning in the next day or so. I'm not sure what the plans are for the laid out for introducing proposals, but I will.
I asked that question because I was wondering was the goal to present more than one recommendation based upon the preliminary estimates of your maps and the data that you have on the maps? What are you going to do in terms of the proposal? How are you going to present those, and how many proposals do you plan on presenting?
I believe it's more than one, but I don't know if the exact number has been determined, and I stand open for clarification or correction from anyone else from either our strategies or other strategies.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, our, Commissioner, our intention is to present the first set of iterations of the map on Monday at our Monday meeting. As I understand it, the number of maps that we'll be presenting are dependent upon the criteria decisions that we are going to be asking you about in just a moment. Because how those will provide constraints for how the maps can be drawn. I mean, you have expressed in your first meeting the intention to work from the existing map. And there are certain things that are laid out in the charter that are required, contiguity, not packing or diluting minority interest. Then there's the question of what constitutes substantially equal populations for the district, whether that's plus or minus 5 or another number. Though all those variables need to be factored in to how the maps may be created. The other important factor is as part of the 2011 process that when you were the chair, the commission decided that it was a priority not to divide any community except for the city of Cleveland. And that would making that decision again would have an impact on what you can take out of an existing district and what you can put into an existing district. So those are all things that are going to be factored into how the maps are drawn, and a number of iterations we can do will depend on the criteria that you give us to work with.
It's, given the time constraints, it's going to be extremely difficult to try and get those maps out so the public can digest those maps as well as the councilman. So I just wanted to make sure that the timelines are consistent with what the expectations are with the public. So I'll wait to see that first iteration before I ask any more questions about this at this point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll second that in the sense that want to wait until we see what the first draft or drafts are looking like. Certainly, we know the statutory requirements have to be adhered to in any iteration that is developed.
Yes.
The contiguousness or contiguity, the neither packing nor diluting African American nor Hispanic populations, and not splitting precincts. Beyond that, I would ask, you mentioned that you're able to run a compactness score, and if you do present different drafts, is that something you can readily do, like almost with a push of a button or running a formula that you could show us the compactness score for each as we go through them, or is that something that's more complex that is going to be for later in the process?
Mr. Chairman, I need to defer to Mr. Mueller or Mr. Cassidy to answer that question.
You're welcome to do so.
Thank you.
Yeah, yes, the answer is yes, that can be a part of standard reporting that we provide.
Great, thank you. And I would ask, at least from my perspective, that we have that information as we consider any different drafts. Any other questions from other commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, are we going to be provided hard copies of these maps?
Commissioner, yes.
Okay, good. Because I work from hard copies.
Everything we've been trying to give you everything both electronically and once you come to the meeting, give it to you in hard copy as well. So.
Okay, thank you.
And for these, it needs to be bigger than what the slides are presented, and we're going to
it.
have to do that. You have
Thank
to be
you.
able to see it.
Other comments or questions at this point? All right, Mr. Thomas, please proceed.
Great,
We've got
thank
more
you.
to come.
The next section is about the decision points that we have for you that we'd like to ask you to consider, and Michael Mueller will be making that part of the presentation.
Great, thank you. Mr. Mueller, you're back up again.
Great, and actually, before I hit on that, I just did not want to interrupt the flow on the map iterations, but I just, I'll expound a little bit on it just from looking at the process last time, knowing that there was 8 different iterations that were considered, and understanding like the compressed timeline. Obviously, it's really important that we have the website and getting public information out there, but my expectation, and having gone through a number of these processes, that in a dream scenario, the first map, everyone will say, "We've done a great job. It's perfect." But I do not believe in the kind of Pollyanna version of that. So I think we're going to go through a number of iterations through this. I don't want to put a real number on it, but I can say that I've been in through processes with our team here before, and the idea of us, drawing, a half a dozen maps in the course of a week, and every time we go through it, winding up making some adjustments here and there. I mean, that's the realistic expectation. So I think that it's many maps as you want and need, and gets us to the right spot is really what the answer is going to be. So it really is kind of an open-ended process, but the we're here to serve attitude is what you're going to get. From us is that whatever has to be done, we will make it happen, and that's going to be the way we approach it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mueller. Any questions or comments on those points? I think, Mr. Thomas, you can move on if you're.
Well, if Michael, if you.
Yep. I will pick up on decision.
Yeah, you're
points.
still with Mr. Mueller. Thank you.
Yes, I'm still up. So what I wanted to and this I think so critical for us getting to a place that is closer to a reality of where we'd like to be in the end game in terms of drawing maps, is that looking at the current map, and we've spent a lot of time focused on the data elements of it. One of the things that we would really be helpful on from a guidance standpoint is open to kind of asking the commissioners the feedback of some areas that maybe you look at as like real positives that you do on the current map, as it exists, that we need to find ways to preserve, and also some of the negatives, some of the areas you feel like that maybe have shifted over time and need to be addressed. Because what I really would ask for as much as possible is us getting to some of the on the ground reality. And I think when we heard from the councilman earlier, like those are like exactly like the perfect point. Understanding where a town or city or village, where that is, can really be a representative point about where does this split. And so I would ask if there's anything before we draw that first iteration that people feel strongly or even lukewarm, they'd like us to try a few things along the way. I'd appreciate your counsel and guidance at this part of the process.
Any comments or questions on that point that Mr. Mueller has raised?
Well, I would just say that those who made this map 10 years ago did a pretty good job. I realize it's a little out of whack, but for it to last this long is quite commendable. I hope we can be as successful.
I do. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kessel. I agree with that. One point in terms of looking at the current map and, as Mr. Kessel put it, being a little out of whack, just a fairly minor question I have, but for the sake of clarity for the public and for us, I noticed that a couple of the deviations on what we're being presented with today are very slightly different from the numbers that we had on Tuesday. And I'm not being critical of the work. I realize this is all being done in very fast fashion. And so I'm assuming the latest numbers are the correct numbers, and just wondered, and this may be a question more for Mr. Cassidy than Mr. Mueller, but was that a matter of certain census blocks making sure they were in the right district to be counted properly, or was it just kind of running the formula in the spreadsheet correctly? Just so we know, in case the public's looking and saying, why did they have a, one deviation number for District 7, for example, on Tuesday, but now it's slightly less deviation from the ideal?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, because I should have addressed it myself, and I did not. But your presumption is pretty much right on the first part. What I did was not able to prior to Tuesday was there's a couple, I was essentially matching up the council districts to the precincts in the geographic file that I had, and there was a couple of noted split precincts. I think 5 precincts split into a total of 10 parts that I was not able to account for fully and accurately on the numbers that we had put in the first presentation on Tuesday. I then did go down and get into the details yesterday, and so there will be several. Yeah, it's essentially several census blocks that switched in between council districts, so they are slightly different.
Understood, thank you. And actually, I have some familiarity with that. While we are not allowed to split precincts in drawing new maps, in the subsequent 10 years after maps are drawn, the Board of Elections will typically go through a process of drawing new precincts, and the Board of Elections tries to avoid splitting precincts between governmental entities, but split precincts do still end up happening. So I appreciate that explanation. That gives great clarity on it. Thank you, Mr. Cassidy.
Likewise, I also appreciate that explanation because I did not have the institutional knowledge. I presumed that was the case, that they were split after the fact, but was wondering. So I appreciate that clarification, and I'm happy that you were able to offer it. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Mr. Thomas, is there more from?
There are a couple
yes?
more things.
Great. Go ahead.
We complete the.
You know, actually, I still had a couple more points I was going to hit on, but so I'll finish up. I'll go through this, but I wanted to just and add that it was a helpful takeaway. That working off of the old map, as much as we're going through balancing population, it's good to get a read of that from the commissioners. And I think one of the big things for us, just so we know kind of the lines we want to stay within, in terms of population deviation amongst the council districts. In the last round of districting, it was plus or minus 5%. As we start our work of drawing the new maps in this district and start balancing population, does the commission want us to stay in that plus or minus 5? Do you want to be open-ended to work with that from maybe a starting point, and then perhaps we'll leave that to discussions after you see the first round of maps? What would be your guidance to our work moving forward?
And again, to the other commissioners, anyone want to comment on that? Ms. Morgan?
Thank you. I'm open to, well, first of all, I think that the 5% plus or minus mark is generally speaking pretty good. I mean, I think that it works, and it gives everyone a fair amount of flexibility when you're drawing lines. But I'm certainly open to to other numbers and to broader interpretations. Thank you.
Ms. Murphy?
What am I at? Yeah, I would concur with that. I don't want us to be locked into something right now. I think we need to have flexibility. We see the maps and we see kind of how this process works out. And we may change that number or not. But maybe for the first set of maps, is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think it works for a starting point.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, to my colleagues, just a historical piece, that 5% deviation, that number was aspirational 10 years ago. And it sort of reflected what we had in front of us. This time around, it may be a little different. And so I concur with both of you in terms of being more open-minded about where the consultants and the public might see it's a good number for us to look at based on the data, population data that's forthcoming. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kessel, any comment on this? I as well. I think we've got some good consensus up here. In addition to being aspirational, I also think the 5% is somewhat arbitrary. So while keeping very much at the forefront of our minds that it says right in the charter, and we're required to draw districts that are substantially equal. That is a vague term, And the decision that landed on 5% last time was apparently an appropriate point last time. We're going to need to make a decision of what is the appropriate number that is substantially equal this time, while also balancing all of the other criteria we have to consider.
Great.
Much appreciated. That gives me a good, good guidepost as we start the process. And then the last of the points I wanted to, ask on, communities of interest, just, as we think, and I spent some time thinking about it myself coming into this, from a lot of different processes gone through. Sometimes we look at, there's areas where, two communities may wind up being different governmental units, but they may share, economic, region because of a, very large employment base that comes out of a certain area. Sometimes transportation routes play a big role. And, just as also, cultural sections where you have cohesive, communities that make sense. And just would, appreciate any feedback starting off if there is some communities of interest that you think we should really be prioritizing as we start the process.
Any commissioners with comments on that? I think we've had some discussion already of noting some of those others that could be taken into account. Any particular comments anyone would like to make?
I think we should be open to it. Yeah. That's the
Thank you,
point.
Ms.
Yeah,
Murphy.
absolutely.
Ms. Morgan?
Yeah, I think that, again, sometimes we don't know what we don't know, right?
Right.
Okay, and so we've already had a couple of groups, significant groups, population groups in Greater Cleveland, Northeast Ohio, that we will take into account. But we would certainly look to you for some suggestions and some recommendations, just based on your knowledge, and your intimate knowledge soon, of these maps and the various iterations thereof.
Thank you. Any other?
Yeah, I would agree. And also, don't make us guess, public. If you have a community or a group in mind that you would like us to preserve, please let us know so that we can do our best to keep that community of interest together.
Exactly right, Mr. Kessel. Thank you. That you took part of what I was going to say right out of my mouth, and I'll go further. We do need to hear from the public. That also means the information of what we're considering needs to be available to the public. So if there is a community of interest that sees the draft map and says, you may not be aware of it, but if you draw the line right here, you're going to split up a very important community of interest and dilute their vote. We need to be made aware of that and be able to consider that because we may not know. And so we're going to be relying heavily on our consultant to inform us. We're also relying on the public and those who have that local knowledge to let us know if there is something of that sort we need to be taking into consideration.
Yeah.
Mr. Thomas?
Much
I think we're still with
appreciated.
Mr. Mueller.
Yes, much appreciated, and I will, and we are looking forward to, diving into that, and obviously we'll listen intently to the public feedback, working with everyone here. So with that, I will hand it back to Mr. Thomas, unless there's any more questions that the commissioners may have.
And not seeing any, Mr. Thomas, you'll go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. That completes our presentation, and we are available to answer any additional questions that we didn't cover that you posed to us.
Sure. Any other questions of Mr. Thomas or his team? Mr. Lumpkin?
Yeah, Mr. Thomas, is there possibly any way that you can look at what's going on in other areas, like in Columbus and in other counties in terms of the redistricting process, to give us this board a sense of how others are attacking this process?
Commissioner Lumpkin, we'd be happy to take a look. I know that we're paying active attention to the things that are happening with the General Assembly for no small part because if they change their deadline, our deadline changes with it. And so we also would want to look, there isn't a council, there's not a county council district redistricting process except in Summit, I believe, because it's the only other charter county in in the state of Ohio, if I get that, I think I have that right. But we can certainly look at other processes and report back on how they're handling it and what they're doing.
Thank you. Other questions at this point? All right. And Mr. Thomas, I think you're also going to then discuss consideration of public forum comments. Or is that, we had the one today.
We are happy to, I'm not sure how we would respond to Councilman Sweeney other than saying we agree with them. Thank you for the work that you're doing.
His comment was in line with other things we've been discussing.
Yes.
Having that local knowledge, if there is an area where drawing the line may split up historically represented contiguous communities, we need to be aware. So we appreciate his coming forward today to let us know of one.
As do we.
Anything further that any commissioner has for our strategies team, Mr. Thomas, or anyone else who's been presenting? I don't see any, so thank you for the presentation today, and thank you for the recommendations at each level on this. So, with that, we will move on to any miscellaneous business that any commissioner has to bring before the commission. Not seeing any. Okay, then I think I'm ready to entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Mr. Lumpkin, seconded by Ms. Morgan. All in favor? Aye. We stand adjourned.